The sound of my own scream woke me up, not from a nightmare, from my living room floor, where I'd been lying for 6 hours with a broken rib and a split lip, counting the bruises like rosary beads. 30 hits. I counted every single one. The sirens outside my building weren't for me yet, but they would be. In my hand, still clutched so tight my knuckles had gone white, was a single piece of paper that would burn Alex's world to ashes. But to understand how I got here, how a woman who once believed in fairy tales ended up calculating revenge while tasting her own blood, you need to go back 3 months. Back to when I still thought love could survive anything. 3 months earlier, I was standing in my kitchen on the Upper West Side, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a courtyard where wealthy mothers pushed designer strollers. The apartment smelled like vanilla extract and fresh basil from the morning's prep work for my catering business. I'd just landed a contract to cater a Fortune 500 company's holiday party, worth more than I'd made in 6 months. My phone buzzed with congratulations from clients. Alex would be so proud, I thought, already imagining his face when I told him. My hands were covered in flour from testing a new pastry recipe when I decided to throw in a load of laundry before my afternoon client meeting. It was a mundane task, the kind of domestic rhythm that punctuates even the most successful woman's day. I remember humming along to Nina Simone, playing from my kitchen speaker, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. Business was booming, the sun was shining, and I had a husband I loved waiting to celebrate my success. How naive that woman was. How blissfully, stupidly unaware. My husband of 14 years, the man who still brought me coffee in bed on Sundays, who kissed my forehead and called me his queen. That's when I found it, a receipt crumpled at the bottom of his gym bag while I was doing laundry. Cartier, 5th Avenue location, $8,300 for a diamond tennis bracelet. Purchased 6 days ago. My anniversary wasn't for another 4 months. My birthday had passed. I stared at that receipt like it was written in a foreign language, my brain refusing to process the implications. The paper felt heavy, weighted with questions I wasn't ready to ask. My first thought, embarrassingly, was that maybe he'd bought it for me as a surprise. An early anniversary gift, perhaps, or just because he felt like spoiling me. I actually smiled at that thought, felt my heart warm with affection. Then reality crept in like cold water seeping through a cracked foundation. Alex wasn't the spontaneous gift type. He was methodical, practical, someone who circled items in catalogs weeks before birthdays and anniversaries. $8,000 on an impulse? Impossible. I sat down on our bedroom floor, still holding his gym clothes in one hand and that damning receipt in the other. The scent of his cologne on the shirt I was holding suddenly made me nauseous. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. How new his gym bag looked, how expensive his workout clothes had become, the designer label on everything. When had he started caring so much about his appearance at the gym? My hands started shaking, a fine tremor that traveled up my arms and settled in my chest as a tight, painful pressure. When Alex came home that evening, loosening his tie with that easy confidence of a man who'd never been questioned, I made myself smile. I'd set the receipt on the counter, casual, like it was a grocery list. I'd rehearsed in my mind how to ask about it, light, curious, not accusatory. But watching him walk through our door, briefcase in hand, that familiar, tired but happy expression on his face, I almost couldn't go through with it. Part of me wanted to hide the receipt, to preserve the illusion a little longer. He barely glanced at it before laughing, that warm sound that used to make me feel safe. The client gift, he explained, for Mrs. Chen? The CEO's wife who'd just secured him a major investment deal. She'd mentioned loving tennis bracelets at a dinner party. Smart business, Sarah, he said, kissing my cheek. You know how these things work. And I did know, or thought I did. I'd built my own business from nothing, understood the delicate dance of client relationships. I'd sent expensive wines and gift baskets to clients myself. understood the investment in maintaining good professional relationships. So I pushed down the whisper in my gut, that primitive instinct that said something was wrong. I wanted to believe him so badly that I made myself blind. But here's what I know now, what I wish I could tell every woman who's ever convinced herself that doubt means weakness. Your body knows before your brain admits it. That night, lying next to Alex in our king-sized bed with its expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to that receipt, to the way he'd dismissed my unasked questions before I could even form them. My body was rigid beside him, every muscle tense while he slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even. I remember watching the ceiling fan rotate in the darkness, counting the rotations like sheep, getting to 300 before I gave up on sleep entirely. At 3 a.m, I got up and found his phone charging in the bathroom. The blue light from the screen illuminated my face in the mirror, and I barely recognized the woman staring back, eyes hollow, expression haunted. I'd never been the type to snoop. In 14 years, I'd never once looked at his messages. I'd prided myself on that trust, considered it the foundation of a mature marriage. But my hands were moving before my conscience could stop them, thumbs trembling as I entered his passcode, our anniversary date. How painfully ironic. The text message was from a number saved simply as J. The words were poison, sweet, and deadly. Last night was everything. Can't wait to wear what you got me. You make me feel alive. My vision tunneled. The bathroom walls seemed to press inward, the space shrinking until I could barely breathe. I read it again, then again, as if repetition would change the meaning. The timestamp showed it had been sent 2 days ago. Around the same time, Alex texted me saying he was stuck in late meetings. My hands operated on autopilot. Screenshot, delete the evidence from his messages, clear the deleted folder. I was shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the phone twice. When I finally set it back on the charger, I noticed my reflection again. The woman in the mirror looked different now, harder, colder, like something fundamental had crystallized inside her. I climbed back into bed, and Alex stirred, reaching for me in his sleep. His arm around my waist felt like a chain, heavy and restricting. I lay there until dawn broke, watching light creep across our bedroom ceiling, painting shadows that looked like prison bars. I spent those early morning hours planning my next move with a clarity that surprised me. The grief would come later, I knew. But in that moment, I felt only a cold, calculating determination. The woman who'd woken up yesterday was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper, someone who understood that nice girls don't win wars. They just get buried with dignity. I know what you're thinking right now, because I can feel your rage through the screen. You're yelling at me to leave, to pack my bags and walk out while he's at work. But betrayal doesn't work that way. It doesn't give you clean exits. It paralyzes you with questions that need answers, with a desperate need to know if the last 14 years of your life were a complete lie or just partially one. So instead of leaving, I dug deeper. The next morning, I confronted Alex over coffee. The early sunlight filled our kitchen, making everything look deceptively normal. The French press between us, the croissants I'd picked up from our favorite bakery, the New York Times spread across the table. I kept my voice light, curious rather than accusatory, because I'd learned long ago that direct confrontation made him defensive. I mentioned the text message casually, as if I'd accidentally seen it while looking for his phone to call mine. His reaction was textbook gaslighting, though I didn't know that term yet. He laughed, a sound that now felt like sandpaper against my skin. "Oh, Sarah," he said with that patient tone he used when explaining things to our nieces. "That's Jenny from accounting. We're planning a surprise retirement party for her supervisor. The gift was from the whole team. You're reading too much into it, honey." He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a gesture that had once been comforting. "You always do this. Make mountains out of nothing. Maybe you should talk to someone about your anxiety. Am I being controlling by checking up on you like this?" His words twisted reality until I was the one apologizing, the one feeling guilty for doubting him. I heard myself saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I just got worried." The words tasted like ash, but they kept coming. He was so good at this, so practiced at making me doubt my own perceptions. I found myself nodding, accepting his explanation even as every cell in my body screamed that it was a lie. He kissed me goodbye that morning with extra tenderness, as if my doubt had made him cherish me more. He held me longer than usual, whispered, "I love you" against my hair, told me he'd bring home my favorite Thai food for dinner. The moment the door closed behind him, I vomited in the kitchen sink, my body rejecting the lies even as my mind tried to accept them. That's when the gaslighting really started to eat at my sanity. For the next 2 weeks, Alex was the perfect husband. He came home early, brought flowers, always my favorites, purple irises and white roses. He took me to our favorite Italian restaurant in Little Italy, where we'd had our first date, requested the same corner table, ordered the same wine. He told me he loved me constantly, held my hand during movies, made love to me with a passion that felt desperate, almost frantic. And I found myself wanting to believe again, wanting to sink back into the comfortable delusion that our marriage was solid. It would have been so easy to accept the surface reality, to stop questioning, to just enjoy this renewed attention. But I couldn't ignore the physical symptoms my body was developing. The way my heart raced whenever his phone buzzed, the nausea that hit me every morning, the insomnia that left me hollow-eyed and shaking. I was losing weight, losing focus at work. My assistant, Marcus, asked if I was okay during a routine planning meeting for an upcoming event. We were in my office going over menu options for a corporate gala when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with genuine concern. "Sarah," he said, setting down his tablet, "when's the last time you ate? You've dropped at least 10 pounds in 2 weeks, and you look like you haven't slept in days." Marcus had been with me for 5 years, had seen me through business crises and family emergencies, but he'd never seen me like this. I lied and said I was fine, blamed it on stress from the new contract, promised I was taking care of myself. But Marcus wasn't buying it. He was a gay man in his late 20s, sharp and perceptive, someone who'd survived his own share of toxic relationships. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Whatever's happening at home, Sarah, you need to deal with it. You're disappearing right in front of me, and it's terrifying to watch." I almost broke then, almost told him everything, the receipt, the text, the constant anxiety that was consuming me from the inside out. But I held it in, changed the subject, buried myself in work. Because what else could I say? That I was unraveling because I couldn't trust my own perception of reality anymore. That the man sleeping next to me every night felt like a stranger wearing my husband's face? Looking back now, I realize that moment with Marcus was pivotal. It was the first time someone from outside my marriage had noticed the deterioration. When you're in the middle of gaslighting, when you're living inside the fog of manipulation, you can't see yourself clearly. You need someone else to hold up a mirror and show you what's really happening. Marcus did that for me, even though I wasn't ready to see it yet. The days blurred together after that conversation. I'd wake up each morning with a knot of dread in my stomach, wondering what new evidence I might find, what new lie Alex would tell. I started keeping that secret journal in a password-protected app on my phone, documenting every suspicious moment, every inconsistency in his stories. The entries read like case notes from a detective. October 3rd. Alex said he was at the gym from 6 to 8 p.m. GPS shows car at Dumbo address. October 5th. Found charged for dinner at Le Bernardin for $387. When asked about his day, he said he grabbed a sandwich at his desk and worked late. October 7th. Called his office to discuss a business matter. Assistant said he'd left for the day at 3 p.m. He didn't get home until 9 p.m. Claimed traffic was terrible. The evidence piled up like autumn leaves, each piece adding to the suffocating weight on my chest. But I kept playing my role, the loving wife who suspected nothing. It was the most exhausting performance of my life. Have you ever felt crazy? Not mentally ill, but genuinely uncertain if your brain is processing reality correctly? That's what Alex's manipulation did to me. He'd deny conversations we'd just had, tell me I was misremembering events from our past, suggest that my business stress was making me paranoid. When I found a woman's earring in his car, small diamond studs that weren't mine, he looked genuinely confused and said they must have belonged to Rebecca, his colleague who'd needed a ride when her car broke down 3 weeks ago. Plausible. Reasonable. Except I'd never heard of Rebecca before. But by then, I was so turned around that I questioned whether he'd mentioned her, and I'd forgotten. The self-doubt was corrosive, eating away at my confidence in my own memory, my own judgment. I started writing things down, keeping a secret journal of conversations and events, trying to create an objective record because I could no longer trust my own mind. The second clue came from an unexpected source. I was picking up dry cleaning from the place on Columbus Avenue, the one Alex had been using for years. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I'd left work early because I had a migraine that wouldn't quit. The shop smelled like chemical solvents and starch, familiar and oddly comforting in its mundanity. The owner, Mr. Kim, an elderly Korean man who'd always been kind to me, handed me Alex's suits with an odd expression. He hesitated, his weathered hands still gripping the plastic-wrapped garments. "Mrs. Walker," he said carefully, "your husband has another pickup. Different address, different name on the ticket." The world tilted. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He showed me a receipt with Alex's signature, but a Brooklyn address I didn't recognize. Dumbo, the trendy neighborhood full of converted warehouses and million-dollar lofts. The name on the account, Alexandra Thompson. My maiden name, as if he was cosplaying being married to me in another location. The audacity of it, the casual cruelty, hit me like a physical blow. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the suits. Mr. Kim looked at me with such pity that I wanted to scream. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I think maybe you should know." He'd known. This kind man I saw maybe twice a month, had seen enough to recognize something wrong and had chosen to tell me. I thanked him, my voice cracking, and left with the suits, standing on the sidewalk in the afternoon sun, feeling like my entire life had just revealed itself to be a stage set with cardboard props. That night, I didn't confront Alex. I'd learned that lesson. Instead, I started building my case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. I called Lisa, my college roommate who now worked in cybersecurity for a major bank. We'd been friends since freshman year, had survived bad boyfriends and worse hangovers together, had been in each other's weddings. If anyone would help me without judgment, it would be Lisa. We met at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from anywhere Alex might be. Lisa arrived early, was already waiting in a corner booth when I got there. She took one look at my face and immediately stood to hug me. "Oh, Sarah," she said. "What did he do?" When I told her everything, the receipt, the texts, the dry cleaning revelation, the constant gaslighting, her face went through stages of shock, anger, then cold determination. She'd been a victim of a toxic relationship herself in her 20s, understood the psychological warfare intimately. By the time I finished talking, her laptop was already open, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She handed me a small device, explaining it was perfectly legal, a GPS tracker I could place in his car. She also showed me how to access our phone records online, how to recover deleted texts from cloud backups, how to check credit card statements for charges I didn't recognize. "Welcome to the 21st century," she said grimly, "where technology makes cheating easier, but also makes catching them easier too." We spent 3 hours in that coffee shop, Lisa teaching me the tools of modern investigation. She showed me how to export data, how to organize evidence chronologically, how to screenshot and save everything to a secure cloud account Alex couldn't access. "You're going to find things you don't want to see," she warned. "Are you ready for that?" I wasn't. Nobody could be ready for the systematic destruction of their reality. But I nodded anyway, because the not knowing was worse than any truth could be. Before we left that coffee shop, Lisa grabbed my hand across the table. "Listen to me, Sarah," she said, her voice fierce. "Whatever you find, whatever this turns into, you need to remember one thing. You are not responsible for his choices. You didn't cause this, you couldn't have prevented it, and you deserve so much better." Her words brought tears to my eyes, the first time I'd cried about the situation. I'd been so focused on investigating, on gathering facts, that I hadn't allowed myself to feel the emotional devastation underneath. Lisa saw me starting to crack and pulled me into a hug right there in the coffee shop. "Let it out," she whispered. "Then we'll get back to work." That cry in Lisa's arms was cathartic but brief. I couldn't afford to fall apart yet. There was too much at stake, too much still to uncover. So I dried my eyes, thanked her for everything, and drove home with a GPS tracker in my purse and a new determination hardening in my chest. The investigation phase was about to kick into high gear. Over the next 3 weeks, I transformed from a trusting wife into a private investigator. I tracked his movements, noting every deviation from his claimed schedule. I discovered charges for hotels in Manhattan, dinners for two at restaurants we'd never been to together, purchases at Victoria's Secret and Sephora for sizes and shades that weren't mine. The GPS showed regular trips to that Dumbo address, always during business hours when he claimed to be at the office downtown. Each piece of evidence was a small death, killing the marriage I'd thought I had one revelation at a time. I created spreadsheets, organized photos, built timelines. My home office became a war room with printed documents and highlighted statements covering every surface. Marcus noticed the change in me. I was focused again, energized, no longer the hollow-eyed ghost I'd been. He probably thought I'd worked through my problems. He had no idea I was preparing for total warfare. The smoking gun came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Alex said he had a late meeting with investors, wouldn't be home until after midnight. I was in my office pretending to work on menu plans when the GPS tracker on my phone showed his car parked at the Dumbo address. I stared at that little blue dot for 10 minutes, my heart hammering, making a decision that terrified me. I drove to Brooklyn, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The windshield wipers beat a rhythm that matched my racing pulse. The building was a converted warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place that cost at least $10,000 a month. Industrial chic, exposed brick, the sort of trendy renovation that real estate agents called authentic urban living. I sat in my car across the street for an hour, gathering courage before I saw them. Alex and a woman, maybe 30 years old, blonde, beautiful in that effortless way that comes from never having struggled. They were visible through the lit windows of a second-floor loft, cooking dinner together, laughing, touching with the casual intimacy of a long-established couple. I watched Alex kiss her neck while she stirred something on the stove. I watched him wrap his arms around her waist from behind, swaying with her to music I couldn't hear. I watched them be us, or what we used to be before lies became his native language. She was wearing yoga pants and one of his old college t-shirts, the one I thought had been lost in a move years ago. They looked domestic, comfortable, real. The pain was so physical, I doubled over, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel and sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in, my ribs crushed by the weight of this confirmation. All the evidence I'd been gathering had been abstract, charges on statements, dots on a map. This was visceral, undeniable, the truth made flesh and kissing my husband in a loft I'd unknowingly helped pay for. I must have sat there crying for 20 minutes, maybe more. The rain continued to fall, drumming on the roof of my car like a funeral march. I watched them through my tears, these two people who looked so happy, so in love. They had no idea I was out there, watching their stolen happiness, bearing witness to my own destruction. At one point, the blonde woman, Jennifer, though I didn't know her name yet, laughed at something Alex said, throwing her head back in genuine delight. I recognized that laugh, that spontaneous joy. It was how I used to laugh with him, back when our love was new and everything felt possible. The thought that cut deepest wasn't just that he was cheating. It was that he was giving her the version of himself I'd fallen in love with. The charming, attentive, romantic Alex who brought flowers and made inside jokes and looked at you like you were the only person in the world. That man had disappeared from my life so gradually I hadn't noticed when he left. But here he was, alive and well, just not for me anymore. He'd taken the best parts of himself and given them to someone else, leaving me with the hollow shell, the lies, the gaslighting. But then something shifted. The grief transformed into something colder, harder. I stopped crying and started taking photos, video. I documented everything through that window. Their domestic bliss bought with money from my business accounts. I realized with sudden clarity. I captured them eating dinner, Alex pouring wine, the two of them laughing at something on her laptop. When I finally drove home at midnight, Alex's car was already in our garage. He was in bed, pretending to be asleep, his clothes smelling like her perfume, something floral and young, nothing like the Chanel No. 5 I wore. I lay next to him and felt nothing but contempt. The woman who'd loved him was dead. In her place was someone calculating her revenge with the precision of a surgeon planning an incision. I spent that night on our couch, researching divorce lawyers, looking up property laws, learning about marital assets and forensic accounting. By dawn, I had a plan. The hardest part wasn't the investigation or even the emotional devastation. It was the performance. For the next 3 weeks, I had to pretend everything was fine while secretly meeting with lawyers, transferring money into accounts Alex couldn't access, documenting every piece of evidence. I smiled at breakfast and made his favorite dinners. I responded to his "I love yous" with my own, each word ash in my mouth. I made love to him when required, disconnecting my mind from my body like I was watching someone else go through the motions. The psychological toll was immense. I developed a stress rash across my chest that I hid with high-necked shirts. My hair started falling out in the shower, coming away in clumps that clogged the drain. I lost 12 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, my clothes hanging loose on a frame that was becoming skeletal. But I held steady, because I knew that one wrong move, one sign that I knew the truth, would give him time to hide assets, to spin the narrative, to paint me as the crazy, jealous wife. I'd seen enough divorce horror stories to know that the winner is whoever strikes first with the most evidence. There was one close call that nearly destroyed everything. I'd met with my lawyer, Patricia Chen, no relation to any CEOs, at her office in Midtown. She was a shark in Chanel suits, known for destroying unfaithful husbands in court. Her office was all glass and steel, modern and cold. The perfect environment for planning tactical destruction. I'd hired her because she was ruthless and because she'd successfully handled cases where business assets were intertwined with marital ones. We'd been going over strategy for 2 hours when my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Where are you? Thought you were working from home today." My blood turned to ice. Patricia noticed immediately, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Problem?" she asked. I'd told him I had a supplier meeting, but apparently he'd called my office looking for me. Marcus, bless him, had covered by saying I'd stepped out, but he didn't know where. I texted back that I'd run to the restaurant supply store in Queens, had forgotten to tell him. The lie came easily, too easily. I was becoming fluent in deception, learning his language. He responded with, "Okay, love you. Want me to grab dinner on the way home?" Patricia watched me with knowing eyes as I typed back a loving response, complete with heart emojis and a suggestion for sushi from our favorite place. "This is the moment where most women crack," she said quietly. "The pressure of maintaining the lie while living with someone who's lying to you." Can you hold it together for another few weeks? I looked at her across that expensive desk, this woman who'd seen dozens of cases like mine, who knew exactly what I was going through. Yes, I said, because the alternative was walking away with nothing while Alex and his mistress lived in the loft I'd unknowingly helped pay for. Patricia nodded, satisfied. Then let's destroy him. The next phase of my plan required stealth and perfect timing. Patricia connected me with a forensic accountant named David Rodriguez, who specialized in uncovering hidden assets and financial infidelity. David worked out of a small office in the financial district, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. But inside was a team of investigators who could trace money through layers of corporate structures and offshore accounts. Over 3 intensive sessions, we combed through 7 years of bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns, and business records. David was in his 50s, a former IRS investigator who'd gone private. He had the dogged persistence of someone who'd spent decades following money trails. The first session was overwhelming. David sat me down and explained exactly what he'd be looking for: patterns of unusual transactions, transfers to unknown accounts, charges that didn't match up with known activities, discrepancies between reported income and actual spending. He asked me questions I'd never thought to ask myself. Did Alex have access to your business accounts? Yes. Did he handle any of the bookkeeping? Yes. Did you review financial statements together regularly? No. I'd trusted him to handle it. Each answer I gave seemed to deepen David's concern. By the end of that first session, he'd already found several red flags. A series of transfers to an LLC I'd never heard of, charges from a property management company in Brooklyn, payments to vendors that didn't exist when I cross-referenced them with my actual supplier list. The second session was worse. David had spent the week between sessions digging deeper, and what he found was staggering. He walked me through it all with the clinical precision of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. There were offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations with names that sounded legitimate but led nowhere. Years of systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. David estimated that Alex had been doing this since the second year of my business, right around the time it started becoming profitable. The third session was when David laid out the full scope of the embezzlement. What David uncovered made me physically ill. Alex had been siphoning money from my catering company for at least 3 years, using his position as my business manager, a role I'd given him out of trust, to slowly drain profits into offshore accounts. He'd created shell companies, false vendor accounts, even charged personal expenses as business costs. The Dumbo Loft was purchased under an LLC he'd created, using my business as collateral for the loan. The bracelet was one of dozens of expensive gifts, all charged to credit cards linked to my company. Conservatively, he'd stolen over $300,000 from me. From my work, my talent, my 15-hour days building something from nothing. Every late night I'd spent perfecting recipes. Every weekend I'd sacrificed to cater events. Every success I'd celebrated thinking we were building our future together. He'd been stealing from it, using my hard work to fund his double life. David compiled it all into a comprehensive report that Patricia said would eviscerate Alex in court. But I wanted more than a legal victory. I wanted public destruction. The opportunity came when Alex announced he was being promoted to senior vice president at his investment firm. There would be a celebration, he said, a gala at the Plaza Hotel with all the major players in New York finance. Partners, clients, competitors, everyone who mattered in his professional world would be there. He was so excited, like a kid before Christmas, talking about how this promotion would change our lives, how we'd finally have the income to match my success. He went on about the raise, the corner office, the expanded responsibilities. The irony was suffocating. I smiled and congratulated him, already planning how I'd use his moment of triumph as the stage for his complete humiliation. Patricia initially advised against it. Divorce court would be enough, she argued. We have all the evidence we need. You'll get everything you're entitled to and more. Why risk the spectacle? But I was beyond pragmatic advice. I needed the world to see what he was, needed his colleagues and friends to know the truth before he could spin it into some story about his crazy, jealous wife who couldn't handle his success. I needed everyone who'd ever respected him to know that respect was based on a lie. So I planned it carefully, making sure all the right people would be there to witness his fall. I contacted a reporter at the Wall Street Journal who specialized in white-collar crime, fed her enough information to be interested, but not enough to publish before my timeline. I coordinated with Patricia to have the divorce papers filed the afternoon of the gala. I even hired a professional makeup artist and hairstylist for the event, not out of vanity, but because I needed to look strong, powerful, untouchable. The gala was on a Friday evening in early November. I'd spent the day preparing, not just physically but mentally. I meditated, did yoga, ran through my speech a dozen times until the words felt natural. I wore a red dress, the color of war, the color of blood. My hair and makeup were flawless, professionally done at a salon I'd never been to before, creating a version of myself that was both familiar and transformed. I looked powerful, and I needed that armor. Alex kept complimenting me, saying how stunning I looked, how proud he was to have me on his arm. "You're going to be the most beautiful woman there," he said, kissing my temple. "I'm so lucky." The words that once would have made me glow now just made me cold. In the car ride to the plaza, he held my hand and talked about his speech, about how he was going to thank me in front of everyone for my support. Each word was a nail in his coffin, and he was hammering them in himself, completely oblivious. When we walked into the ballroom, I took in the scene with the cold assessment of a general surveying a battlefield. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across white linen and silver settings. Round tables surrounded a central dance floor, a podium with a microphone at the front. At least 200 people, all dressed in evening wear, all eager to celebrate Alex's success. I recognized several faces from his office, including his boss and the firm's founding partners. Perfect. The witnesses were in place. I made small talk through cocktail hour, playing the devoted wife while Patricia texted me updates. Everything was ready on her end. The divorce papers had been filed that afternoon. The process server was waiting outside. David had sent the financial evidence to the Wall Street Journal reporter who was in attendance, posing as a guest. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment. During dinner, I barely touched my food. Perfectly seared salmon with asparagus, a dish I would have normally loved. Alex was at a table near the front with his colleagues, and I was seated with the spouses, making polite conversation about children and vacation homes in the Hamptons. A woman next to me complained about her husband working too much. I smiled and said nothing, thinking about how her problems were adorable in their simplicity. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Patricia. "You ready? The media contact is here. We can serve him right after his speech." I texted back, "Wait for my signal." When dessert was served, a chocolate torte with gold leaf that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, Alex's boss approached the podium to introduce him. The room fell silent, except for the soft clink of silverware being set down. I watched Alex stand, adjusting his tie, his face glowing with pride and anticipation. This was his moment, the culmination of years of work and manipulation and lies. I felt no sympathy, only a cold satisfaction that I was about to take it all away. Alex's speech started with humble gratitude, thanking his mentors and colleagues. He told a charming anecdote about his first day at the firm, made everyone laugh with a self-deprecating joke. He was good at this, I'd give him that. Charismatic, engaging, the kind of man people wanted to succeed. Then he turned to me, gesturing for me to stand. Everyone's eyes swiveled in my direction as I rose on shaking legs. "I want to especially thank my incredible wife, Sarah," he said, his voice warm with manufactured emotion. "She's built an amazing business while supporting my career every step of the way. Her strength and grace inspire me daily. None of this would be possible without her. The room erupted in polite applause. And that's when I walked toward the podium, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step measured and deliberate. I could feel the room's confusion. This wasn't part of the program. Alex's face registered confusion, then concern, as I didn't stop at my table, but kept coming. When I reached him, I took the microphone from his hand with a smile that must have looked feral. The room went silent, hundreds of faces watching with curiosity and growing discomfort. I could see the Wall Street Journal reporter, a woman named Margaret Chen, holding her phone ready to record. "Thank you, darling, for those beautiful words," I began, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "It's true that I've supported your career. In fact, I've done more than that. I've funded it." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the presentation system with a cable I'd brought specifically for this purpose, and within seconds, the screens around the room lit up with images. Bank statements showing withdrawals to offshore accounts, credit card charges for hotels and jewelry, photos of Alex and his mistress through that Dumbo loft window, captured in moments of intimacy that left no room for interpretation. The forensic accountant's report summarized in bullet points that damned him completely. $300,000 embezzled. A secret property purchased with stolen funds. A double life spanning 3 years. The gasps started small, then grew into a wave of shocked whispers. I watched Alex's face drain of color, watched him reach for the microphone, but I held it away, continuing with the calm of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. "Alex has spent our marriage teaching me that I'm too sensitive, too emotional, too quick to jump to conclusions," I said, making eye contact with his boss, with the partners, with everyone who needed to hear this. "He's made me doubt my own sanity while stealing from my business to fund his mistress's lifestyle. The loft in Dumbo, the jewelry, the expensive dinners, all purchased with money he embezzled from my company, where he held a position of trust as my business manager." I paused, letting the information sink in, watching the room process what this meant. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. A woman gasped. Alex tried to speak, to deny, but I talked over him. "I filed for divorce this afternoon. The papers are being served right now. I've also provided all evidence of financial fraud to the appropriate authorities. But I wanted you all to know the truth before Alex could spin this into some narrative about a failing marriage or a vindictive wife. This is who he really is, a thief, a liar, and a man who makes himself feel powerful by systematically destroying the woman who loved him." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive ballroom. Then I delivered the line I'd been crafting for weeks. The mic drop moment that would define this disaster. "This is the last deal you'll ever make on my behalf, Alex. I hope she was worth your career, your reputation, and your freedom." I handed him the microphone, placed the divorce papers from my purse on the podium beside him, and walked out of that ballroom with my head high and my dignity intact. Behind me, chaos erupted, voices shouting questions, Alex's desperate attempts to explain, his boss demanding answers. I didn't look back. Outside, Patricia was waiting with the process server and a town car. We drove away as reporters who'd been tipped off by Patricia's media contact rushed toward the hotel entrance. I'd timed it perfectly. The story would be online within the hour, complete with all the evidence I'd provided. Alex's firm had a zero-tolerance policy for financial impropriety, and his boss was famously vicious about protecting the company's reputation. By morning, Alex would be unemployed, publicly humiliated, and facing potential criminal charges. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but I was the eye of the hurricane, calm and focused while everything around me burned. Patricia fielded calls from reporters, Alex's frantic lawyer, and even the mistress, who apparently hadn't known Alex was married and was appropriately horrified. The forensic accountant's report made its way to both civil and criminal courts. Alex's firm terminated him before the sun rose, citing gross misconduct and violation of fiduciary duty. His professional license was suspended pending investigation. The loft in Dumbo went into foreclosure when the bank discovered the fraudulent loan application. Social media exploded with the story, making Alex infamous in financial circles as the man who destroyed his career by stealing from his wife's catering business. The mockery was brutal and sustained. His mother called me crying, begging me to forgive him, to think of the family. I listened politely and explained that I'd already thought of the family, specifically the one he'd betrayed for 3 years. When she tried to defend him, to suggest that all marriages have problems, I asked her if she'd loan him $300,000 since I was no longer funding his lifestyle. She hung up. Alex himself tried everything in those first weeks. First came denial, claims that I'd misunderstood, that the evidence was circumstantial. When that failed, he shifted to anger, showing up at my new apartment, I'd moved out immediately, to scream accusations through the door until building security removed him. Then came the bargaining phase, lengthy emails and voicemails promising to change, to get help, to spend the rest of his life making this right. I blocked his number and forwarded everything to Patricia. His friends, the ones who'd socialized with us for years, divided into camps. Some reached out to express shock and support. Others, particularly his college buddies, suggested I was being vindictive, that public humiliation was too far. I removed those people from my life without hesitation. If they could excuse embezzlement and infidelity, they had no place in my future. The mistress, whose name turned out to be Jennifer Shaw, sent me a letter through her lawyer. It was an apology, explaining that Alex had told her he was divorced, that she'd had no idea about me or the stolen money. She'd ended things immediately upon learning the truth and was cooperating with authorities. I felt nothing reading it. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just emptiness where rage used to be. The legal proceedings moved faster than expected. With such comprehensive evidence and Alex's complete inability to defend himself, Patricia demolished him in court. I was awarded full ownership of my business, repayment of the embezzled funds plus interest, and the majority of our marital assets. Alex was left with legal debt, unemployment, and a tarnished reputation that made him virtually unemployable in his field. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen too many cases like mine, delivered a scathing rebuke of Alex's behavior before ruling. She noted that financial abuse was domestic violence, that what he'd done wasn't just theft, but a systematic destruction of his wife's autonomy and security. Her words validated everything I'd felt but hadn't been able to articulate during those gaslit weeks. When Alex tried to plead poverty to avoid the full repayment, Patricia produced evidence of hidden accounts he'd forgotten to close. He'd set aside money for emergencies, apparently, just not the emergency of his wife discovering his crimes. The judge was not amused. The criminal investigation was ongoing, but Patricia was confident he'd face charges. Even if he didn't, his life as he'd known it was over. 6 months after that night at the plaza, I was sitting in my new apartment on the Upper East Side, a 3-bedroom with a terrace overlooking the river, purchased entirely in my own name. The catering business had exploded after the publicity, in a strange twist of fate. Clients appreciated the narrative of a woman who'd overcome betrayal and emerged stronger. My revenue had tripled, necessitating hiring additional staff and renting a commercial kitchen space. The recovery process wasn't linear. There were setbacks and dark days mixed in with the victories. Some mornings I'd wake up and forget, just for a moment, that my marriage was over. I'd reach across the bed expecting to find Alex there, then remember with a jolt of grief and relief that I was alone. The grief was for who I'd thought he was, for the 14 years I'd invested in a lie. The relief was for being free of the constant manipulation, the walking on eggshells, the erosion of my self-trust. Therapy helped tremendously. My therapist, Dr. Miriam Cohen, specialized in trauma recovery and narcissistic abuse. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just infidelity. It was systematic psychological abuse, the gaslighting, the financial control, the manipulation of my reality. These were tactics abusers used to maintain power over their victims. Naming it, understanding the pattern, helped me stop blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. One particularly helpful exercise Dr. Cohen had me do was writing 2 letters. One to Alex that I'd never send, saying everything I needed to say, and one to my younger self, the woman who'd married him with such hope and trust. The letter to Alex was furious, profane, devastating. I didn't hold back. Writing it felt like lancing a wound, letting out poison that had been festering. The letter to my younger self was harder, full of compassion and grief for the woman I'd been, the innocence I'd lost. I'd been featured in New York Magazine's profile of women entrepreneurs who'd turned personal disaster into professional success. The photos showed me in chef's whites, confident and smiling, surrounded by the team I'd built. No mention of Alex, except as an unfortunate chapter now closed. I barely thought about him anymore, which felt like the truest victory. The space he'd occupied in my mind was filled with better things: new friendships, creative projects, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. I'd started dating casually, nothing serious, just remembering what it felt like to be pursued with honest intentions. My therapist said I was processing the trauma remarkably well, though I still had moments of grief for the marriage I'd thought I had, even if it had never really existed. But let me stop here and shift gears, because beyond my story of revenge and recovery, there are lessons that might help someone listening right now. The pattern of behavior Alex demonstrated is textbook financial abuse combined with psychological manipulation. Financial abuse occurs when one partner uses money as a weapon to control, deceive, or maintain power over another. It can include limiting access to bank accounts, running up debt in your name, or, like in my case, stealing directly from your income or business. The signs are often subtle at first. A partner who insists on managing all finances, makes large purchases without discussion, or becomes defensive when questioned about money. In my situation, Alex weaponized my trust, using his role in my business to slowly drain resources while making me doubt my own observations when I noticed discrepancies. The gaslighting component is crucial to understand. Abusers like Alex don't just lie, they systematically undermine your confidence in your own perception of reality. When I found evidence of his betrayal, his first response was always to suggest I was wrong, too sensitive, or mentally unstable for questioning him. This is intentional psychological manipulation designed to keep victims confused and compliant. If you're reading this and recognizing these patterns, please know you're not crazy. Your instincts are probably right. Trust that voice that says something is wrong. Here's my practical advice if you suspect financial infidelity or abuse. First, gather evidence quietly before confronting. Screenshot messages, photograph documents, access bank and credit statements online. Store everything in a secure location your partner can't access, a cloud account they don't know about, a friend's house, a safety deposit box. I created a dedicated email account that Alex knew nothing about and forwarded all evidence there. I also printed physical copies and kept them at Lisa's apartment. Redundancy is key. You want multiple backups in case one source is discovered or compromised. Second, consult a lawyer before you confront. I cannot stress this enough. Patricia's guidance was invaluable in protecting my assets and building a legal case. Many lawyers offer free initial consultations for domestic abuse cases, and financial abuse absolutely qualifies as domestic violence. When you meet with a lawyer, bring all your evidence organized chronologically. Be honest about everything, even the parts that make you look bad or feel embarrassing. Your lawyer needs the full picture to protect you effectively. Ask about protective orders if you feel unsafe. Ask about freezing joint accounts to prevent your partner from draining them once they know you're onto them. Third, secure your own finances immediately. Open accounts in only your name at a different bank, not just a different branch of the same bank, but a completely different institution. Use paperless statements so nothing arrives at your home address. Redirect your income if you can do so without raising suspicion. Check your credit report for unknown debts or accounts opened in your name. I discovered Alex had taken out a credit card in my name that I knew nothing about, with $15,000 charged to it. The forensic accountant found that too. If you find fraudulent accounts, report them immediately and consider placing a freeze on your credit to prevent new accounts from being opened. Fourth, build a support network beyond your marriage. I was lucky to have Lisa and Marcus, but professional support is equally important. Therapists, financial advisors, and legal experts who specialize in these situations. Find a therapist who understands trauma and narcissistic abuse. Not all therapists are trained in this specific area, and you need someone who won't suggest couples counseling or try to save the marriage. You need someone who will help you survive and escape. Join online support groups for people experiencing financial abuse or infidelity. Knowing you're not alone, hearing other people's stories, can be incredibly validating when you're questioning your own reality. Fifth, create an exit strategy before you reveal what you know. Where will you live? Do you have emergency funds they can't access? Do you have copies of important documents? Passports, birth certificates, marriage license, tax returns? Do you have a safety plan if they become violent when confronted? I had an overnight bag packed and hidden at Lisa's apartment with cash, important documents, medications, and a change of clothes. I never needed it, but having it gave me peace of mind. Finally, document everything once you know. Dates, amounts, conversations, evidence. The more comprehensive your records, the stronger your legal position. What Alex did was not just betrayal, it was theft and fraud. The legal system takes financial crimes seriously when properly documented. Keep a journal of events, especially instances of gaslighting or emotional abuse. These can be harder to prove than financial crimes, but they establish a pattern of behavior. Save emails, texts, voicemails. Record conversations if you live in a one-party consent state. Build your case like you're preparing for trial, because you might be. Now back to wrapping up my story. That morning in my new apartment, 6 months post-divorce, I received an unexpected visitor. Alex's mother, Eleanor, showed up unannounced, looking aged and diminished in a way that almost inspired sympathy. Almost. She asked if we could talk, just for a few minutes, and against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my couch, wringing her hands, and told me that Alex had moved back home with her and his father. He couldn't find work, was deeply depressed, and spent most days in bed. His father had cut him off financially, ashamed of what he'd done. Eleanor wasn't there to beg on his behalf, she assured me. She just wanted me to know that he was suffering, that the punishment had perhaps exceeded the crime. I listened quietly, then asked her a question. "When did you know?" Her face crumpled. She admitted she'd suspected for at least a year that Alex was having an affair, had even confronted him once. He'd denied it, and she'd chosen to believe him because the alternative was too painful. But she'd never imagined the financial component, the systematic theft. She was ashamed, she said, of having raised a son capable of such cruelty. I told Eleanor something I'd learned in therapy. Suffering consequences for your choices isn't punishment, it's accountability. Alex hadn't just cheated or lied. He'd stolen years of my life, my peace of mind, my financial security, and my ability to trust my own judgment. The price he was paying, unemployment, shame, isolation, was fair compensation for those crimes. If he was depressed, perhaps he should seek therapy, like I had to do to undo the psychological damage he'd inflicted. If he couldn't find work, perhaps he should consider careers outside finance, where his reputation preceded him less. But none of that was my responsibility anymore. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face, and thanked me for seeing her. At the door, she turned back and said something that stuck with me. "I always thought you were too good for him, Sarah. I just wish I'd told you before it was too late." After she left, I stood on my terrace watching the river traffic, feeling unexpectedly at peace. This chapter was truly closed. Alex was a ghost now, barely a memory, certainly not someone with power over my present or future. The business continued to thrive. By the end of that year, I'd opened a second location in Brooklyn, hired 30 employees, and signed contracts with 3 major hotels for exclusive catering partnerships. Forbes did a feature on my company's growth, emphasizing the resilience narrative but focusing more on innovation and quality. I'd become something I'd never planned to be. A minor celebrity in the New York food scene, invited to speak at entrepreneurship conferences and women's business forums. The speaking engagements were initially terrifying. Standing in front of hundreds of people, sharing the most painful chapter of my life, felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't prepared for. But something unexpected happened at these events. Women would approach me afterward, sometimes in tears, to share their own stories. Stories of financial abuse, of gaslighting, of marriages that looked perfect from the outside, but were toxic behind closed doors. They thanked me for speaking up, for showing them they weren't alone, for demonstrating that survival and success were possible. One woman in particular stands out in my memory. She approached me after a talk I gave at a women's entrepreneurship summit in Boston. She was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, the kind of woman who looked like she had everything together. But her hands were shaking as she handed me her business card. "I'm living your story right now," she whispered. "I found the receipts last week. I don't know what to do." We sat in the hotel bar for 2 hours. I gave her Patricia's contact information, explained the steps I'd taken, shared the resources that had helped me. But more than practical advice, I think what she needed was permission. Permission to trust her instincts, permission to be angry, permission to blow up her life in order to save herself. A year later, she sent me an email. She'd divorced her husband, won full custody of her children, and started her own consulting firm. The subject line read simply, "Thank you for showing me the way." These moments of connection, of helping other women escape their own versions of my nightmare, gave my experience meaning beyond revenge. It transformed my pain into purpose. At one such event, a young woman approached me afterward, thanking me for sharing my story. She confessed her husband had access to her business accounts and she'd noticed unexplained withdrawals. She wanted to confront him, but was scared. I gave her Patricia's card and told her what I wished someone had told me earlier. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're gathering strength for the fight ahead. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait for the right moment to strike. She hugged me, crying, and I hoped she'd have the courage to save herself like I'd eventually saved myself. Dating after divorce was its own adventure, which I'll keep brief because this isn't a romance story. I went on plenty of mediocre first dates, a few decent second dates, and one spectacular disaster that involved a man who cried about his ex-wife all through dinner. But I also discovered something liberating. I liked my own company. The prospect of being alone didn't terrify me anymore. I'd rather be single than settled for something less than I deserved. Learning to date again after such profound betrayal was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. I found myself hypervigilant, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for signs of deception. On a first date with a perfectly nice lawyer, he mentioned having a late meeting the previous week. And I immediately felt my chest tighten, my mind racing through possibilities of what he might be hiding. It took conscious effort to remind myself, this isn't Alex. Not everyone is lying. Not every late meeting is a cover for infidelity. My therapist helped me work through what she called relationship PTSD. The triggers were everywhere. A phone turned face down on a table, a vague answer about weekend plans, even innocent compliments that felt too smooth, too practiced. I had to learn the difference between healthy caution and projecting my trauma onto innocent people. It was exhausting work, and there were times I wanted to give up on dating entirely, to just accept that Alex had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. But then I met Daniel. It happened at a food industry conference in Chicago, of all places. He was an architect who specialized in restaurant design, and we ended up sitting next to each other at a panel discussion about sustainable commercial kitchens. He made a joke about the pretentious speaker. I laughed. and we ended up talking through the entire coffee break. There was something different about him, a quietness, a steadiness that felt safe rather than boring. When I did eventually meet someone, a divorced architect named Daniel, who was patient and kind and made me laugh, it was easy in a way my marriage to Alex never had been. There was no game playing, no manipulation, no keeping score. Just two adults who enjoyed each other and were honest about their pasts and hopes. We took it slow, both scarred enough to value careful building over passionate rushing. Whether it would last, I didn't know. But I wasn't afraid of it ending either. I'd survived worse than heartbreak. I'd survived systematic betrayal and come out stronger. A year to the day after the divorce was finalized, I threw a party. Not a celebration of the divorce itself, but a celebration of everything I'd built and become, my staff, my friends, my family, everyone who'd supported me through the worst year of my life. We filled my apartment with laughter and food and music, toasting to second chances and new beginnings. Planning that party had been therapeutic in its own way. I'd spent weeks preparing the menu, choosing dishes that represented different phases of my journey. There was a deconstructed version of the first recipe I'd ever sold professionally, a sign of where I'd started. There were items from the Fortune 500 contract that had been pending when everything fell apart, representing the success I'd achieved despite the chaos. And there were new creations, experimental dishes I'd developed in the past year, symbolizing the future I was building. Marcus gave a speech that made me cry, talking about how I'd inspired him to leave a toxic relationship of his own. He'd been dating someone who constantly criticized him, made him feel small, questioned his worth. Watching me fight back, watching me refuse to accept less than I deserved, had given him the courage to walk away. Now he was with someone who treated him with respect and genuine love. "Sarah showed me that leaving isn't giving up," he said to the room. "It's choosing yourself. It's saying your peace of mind is worth more than the comfort of familiarity." Lisa presented me with a gift, a framed photo from our college graduation, the two of us young and hopeful, with a note that said, "She always had it in her." We'd been through so much together over the years, bad breakups, career changes, her own divorce 5 years earlier. She'd been my rock through all of this, never once suggesting I was overreacting or being too harsh. "That's what real friendship looks like," she said in her toast, "showing up, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy." My parents, who'd flown in from their retirement community in Florida, told me they'd never been prouder. My mother, who'd always been reserved with her emotions, pulled me into the kitchen at one point during the party. She had tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't see it, sweetie," she said. "All those family dinners, all those holidays, he fooled us all. But you didn't just survive this. You turned it into something powerful. You're helping other women. That's my daughter." My father, usually stoic, pulled me aside later and apologized for not seeing what Alex was during all those years. "I always thought he was a little too smooth," he admitted. "Too charming. But you seemed happy, and I thought maybe I was just being an overprotective dad. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have asked more questions." I told him it wasn't his fault, that good manipulators fool everyone. That's what makes them dangerous. They're believable. They have to be, or the con doesn't work. The party lasted well into the night. People shared stories, laughed, cried, toasted to new beginnings. My team from the catering company performed a surprise comedy sketch about dealing with difficult clients that had everyone in stitches. One of my newer employees, a young woman named Sophia, who joined the team 6 months ago, approached me shyly toward the end of the night. "I just want you to know," she said, "working for you has changed my life. Not just because it's a good job, but because you show us every day what it looks like to be strong and kind at the same time. To succeed without compromising who you are. Thank you for that example." That night, standing on my terrace as the party wound down, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. No anxiety about what I'd find on a phone, no dread about confrontations, no weight of secrets. just quiet contentment with the life I'd reclaimed and rebuilt from ashes. The city lights sparkled below me, millions of stories unfolding in apartments and offices and street corners. My story was just one among millions, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of it, not despite what had happened, but because of how I'd handled it. So here's where I want to leave you. Wherever you are right now, whatever city you're listening from. If you're going through something similar, if you're questioning your sanity because someone you love is making you doubt yourself, if you're discovering betrayals that shatter your world, if you're scared to leave because the unknown feels worse than the known pain, I want you to hear this. You are stronger than you think. The person who survives betrayal isn't the same person who entered the relationship, and that's not a bad thing. You'll be harder, yes, but also wiser. More careful, but also more confident. You'll learn to trust yourself again, to rely on your judgment, to build a life that doesn't require someone else's approval or presence. I know right now it feels impossible. I know you're looking at the wreckage of your marriage or relationship and thinking there's no way forward. I know you're terrified of being alone, of starting over, of people finding out, of the financial implications, of admitting you were wrong about someone you loved. I felt all of that too. The fear was paralyzing at times. But here's what I learned. The fear of staying eventually becomes greater than the fear of leaving. There comes a moment, and it's different for everyone, when you realize that one more day of living this lie, one more night of sleeping next to someone who's systematically destroying you, one more instance of doubting your own reality is simply unbearable. That moment is your breaking point, but it's also your turning point. It's when you stop being a victim and start being a survivor. And survival looks different for everyone. For me, it was public confrontation and legal warfare. For you, it might be quiet separation and healing in private. There's no right way to leave, no perfect exit strategy. You do what you need to do to protect yourself, your children if you have them, your sanity, your future. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you there's only one way to handle betrayal. Your path is your own. It won't be easy. There will be nights you cry yourself sick, days you want to give up, moments where loneliness feels unbearable. But on the other side of that pain is a version of yourself that you'll actually like, maybe even love. And that's worth fighting for. I'll be honest with you about something else. You never completely get over this kind of betrayal. It changes you fundamentally. There are still moments, 3 years later, when I feel the ghost of that pain. When I see a happy couple and wonder if they're lying to each other. When I start dating someone new and have to fight the urge to investigate them like I did Alex. When I catch myself checking phones and feeling suspicious for no reason. The trauma doesn't just disappear because you got revenge or won in court or rebuilt your life. But what does happen is that those moments become fewer and farther between. The trauma becomes part of your story instead of the entire story. You learn to live with the scars instead of being defined by the wounds. You find meaning in the pain, purpose in the survival. You help other people escape their own nightmares, and that transforms your suffering into something useful, something that matters beyond your own experience. The story doesn't end with revenge, though that part was satisfying. It ends with reconstruction, with learning that you can be the architect of your own life, that you don't need permission to want more, to demand honesty, to walk away from situations that diminish you. Alex taught me one valuable lesson through his betrayal. The only person you can truly trust is yourself. So trust your gut when something feels wrong. Document the evidence when you find it. Build your exit strategy carefully, and when the time comes, don't hesitate to burn it all down if that's what it takes to be free. You deserve a partner who enhances your life, not one who embezzles from it while telling you you're imagining things. You deserve honesty, respect, and a love that doesn't require constant vigilance. And if you're not getting that, you deserve the courage to leave. Before I go, I want to ask you, where are you listening from right now? What city, what time of day? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know if my story is reaching people or just echoing into the void. And if you agreed with how I handled things, if you think Alex got what he deserved, hit that like button. If you disagreed, if you think I went too far with the public humiliation, tell me why in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about different perspectives. I know some people think the public confrontation was vindictive, that I should have handled it privately, that humiliating him in front of his colleagues and bosses was cruel. And you know what? Maybe it was. Maybe I could have achieved the same legal outcome without destroying his career so spectacularly. But here's the thing. He spent 3 years destroying me privately, systematically, methodically. He stole my money, my peace of mind, my ability to trust my own judgment. He made me doubt my sanity. And he would have kept doing it, would have spun the divorce into some narrative about his crazy wife, would have kept his reputation intact while painting me as the unstable one who couldn't handle his success. The public confrontation wasn't just about revenge, though I won't pretend that wasn't satisfying. It was about controlling the narrative. It was about making sure that everyone who knew him, everyone who might hire him, everyone who might date him in the future, knew exactly who he was. It was about protecting the next woman he might target. Because men like Alex don't change. They just find new victims. So, yes, I humiliated him publicly, and I'd do it again. Would you have done things differently? Would you have confronted him privately, or do you think public accountability was necessary? What would you have done in my position? I want to hear your stories too, if you're willing to share them. This channel exists because I believe in the power of shared experiences, in the strength we gain from knowing we're not alone in our struggles. So engage, comment, tell me what you're thinking. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this one. I've got a whole catalog of personal narratives about overcoming adversity, about women who fought back, about justice served cold. I'll put a couple recommendations up on your screen right now. One about a woman who discovered her husband's secret family. Another about financial revenge that makes my story look tame. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect it fiercely, trust it completely, and never let anyone convince you that your reality isn't real. You know the truth. Listen to that voice, even when, especially when, it's telling you something you don't want to hear. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. Be well, be strong, and remember, you're never alone in this. Someone else is listening to this right now, nodding along, feeling seen for the first time in months. You're part of a community of survivors who refuse to accept less than they deserved. And that's something to be proud of. Your story doesn't end with his betrayal. It begins with your choice to survive, to fight back, to reclaim what was stolen from you. That choice, that moment of deciding you deserve better, is where your real power lives. Now go live your best life, whatever that looks like for you. You've earned it.